Hello and welcome to Palace Intrigue. I am your host, Mark Francis. From the Daily Mail, Meghan Markle's new Spotify podcast has been slammed by critics who said it was almost entirely preposterous and just another way she can talk about herself. Belle Mooney writes for the Mail, "This bizarre saccharine and faintly queasy schmooze fest between Meghan and my dear friend Serena, as we hear over and over again, tells us next to nothing at all about the making of Serena Williams' towering ambition. The idea of a podcast series, taking down the prejudice and smashing what she calls the double standards women face when labelled ambitious, yes, that certainly appealed. Yet from the beginning, the warning bells started to ring. This podcast is yet another example of the inescapable truth that Britain and the USA are two nations divided by a common language. No British broadcaster would sanction the almost incomprehensible giggling and gushing between Meghan and her guest that excludes the listener from any real understanding or intimacy. I waited in vain for sensitive, searching questions about Serena's upbringing and her legendary father Richard's influence. Was she encouraged to be competitive against her sister Venus? Was the ambition inculcated in her from childhood something that weighed too heavily? How interesting her thoughts on that would have been. But 11 minutes pass before we hear a word from the former world number one and holder of 23 Grand Slam titles. Instead, we are treated to a long preamble from the Duchess, who makes it clear that this podcast series isn't just about distinguished guests, but about me too. I'll be talking to household names, experts and cultural commentators, and of course, here there's a knowing chuckle from the former actress. I know a thing or two about those labels myself. I hope that my own lived experience will help other women open up, to reveal the truth that none of us are alone in this world and the future is something we get to write together. Really, it would take a saint not to scoff, but one very rich woman talking to another very rich woman won't be doing much to write the future of a single mum struggling to raise her child in downtown Los Angeles anytime soon. Let's not forget that baby shower when a pregnant Meghan flew to New York City on February 2019 for the glittering event hosted by Serena Williams, who reportedly footed the bill. It was held in the $75,000 per night penthouse of the Mark Hotel in Manhattan's Upper East Side. Do these indulged females really believe that their lived experience has any relevance to all of the lives of ordinary women? Celia Walden in The Telegraph said it was an interview with this inspirational sporting figure in name only, and that Meghan was interviewing herself. She also said the Duchess was the sort of person who hijacks every distressing anecdote with one of their own, only theirs is longer, drawn out, more distressing. The Spectator's columnist said it was hard to believe that it took 28 people, including 8 executive producers, to make the episode, plus Meghan. Their headline, "Meghan's Archetypes podcast is really all about her." The Spectator writes, "It's fair to speculate that the head honchos at Spotify might be wondering if their company got enough bang for its buck." Following its reported $25 million multi-year deal with Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. It's been 611 days since Spotify announced the agreement, but until today, Meghan and Harry had only managed to produce one 33-minute holiday special on their Archwell label in December 2020. You can't rush royal content, clearly. The first guest is Serena Williams, but tennis enthusiasts who tune in might be a bit disappointed. The show is in fact all about Meghan, since it takes 11 minutes for Serena to barely get a word in edgeways. Meghan starts by trotting out her favourite story from her childhood. In case you have been lucky enough not to hear it, let Steerpike sum it up. 11-year-old Meghan was furious when she saw a Procter & Gamble commercial that advertised its dishwashing soap solely to women, wrote to the most powerful people she could think of, including the First Lady Hillary Clinton, and managed to get the ad pulled. Markle added that she has never lost touch with that reality, and in the last few years my desire to do something about it has grown. My 11-year-old voice has also gotten a little more confident, maybe a little louder. She has a little chuckle in her voice, which isn't irritating at all. It's hard to believe that it took 28 people, including 8 executive producers, to make the episode, plus Meghan herself, who was also listed as an executive producer in the credits. Sussex fans, apparently there still are plenty, shouldn't get too excited about the new series. If the couple's last Spotify podcast is anything to go by, this is all they're going to get. James Marriott in The Times described Meghan's podcast as a tastefully soundtracked parade of banalities, absurdities, and self-aggrandizing Californian platitudes. His one-star review said the podcast will make you feel that you've been locked in the relaxation room of a wellness spa with an unusually self-involved yoga instructor. The Independent's Clemens Michelon told how the podcast made it clear that Meghan made the right decision when she cut and ran from the royal family. Their headline, Meghan Markle's new podcast tells us the same thing as Kate and Will's house move. The royal family isn't working for anyone, not even the royals. On GB News, royal expert Kinsey Schofield believes there is an ulterior motive to the content. Outside looking in, there's an ulterior motive here with this podcast that's settling scores. With this episode, you kind of see her go after Tom Bauer, responding to his claim that she's ambitious and scheming. The book also says that Serena Williams told a media contact they weren't necessarily good friends, and he also questions her Procter & Gamble story. She goes into all those things in the very first episode in her podcast. I think those things might be related. Miss Schofield said on GB News, Eamon and Isabel, outside looking in, there's an ulterior motive here with this podcast, and that's settling scores. Palace Intrigue will be right back. Britain's Channel 4 has commissioned Prince Andrew the Musical, an hour-long satirical comedy written by and starring Kieran Hodgson. Described as a satirical send-up of the life and times of the Duke set to a musical score, the special has been commissioned as part of the channel's 40th birthday programming. The 60-minute musical will focus on key events, relationships and controversies of Andrew's life. Channel 4's Ian Katz says, this season shows that Channel 4 is still as mischievous, disruptive and distinctive as when it was born 40 years ago. Instead of a nostalgia-thon of highlights from the last 4 decades, we are celebrating with a collection of irreverent, thought-provoking and hugely entertaining shows that no other broadcaster would air. If we must age, we plan to do it disgracefully. And there you have it. If you'd like to email us, our address is thepalaceintrigue@gmail.com. Please follow us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your favorite shows. I'm Mark Francis. And thanks to John McDermott. It's Palace Intrigue. Good times.